They're exhausted, and out of exhaustion comes desperation. And out of desperation comes the survival mode just to breathe. And this comes at the heel of, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, hired to increase lethality of the U.S. military forces. Again, while I can acknowledge and see the logic behind that, you're dealing with a very exhausted Hawaiian community and a very more exhausted Hawaii, the place, the land. So it's just piling on. And that's kind of what I hoped the Army representatives could feel a little bit today, that this piling on is just unrelenting. And I felt really, I felt for our lovely today. But thank you for indulging me, Chair, at this time. I appreciate it.
Okay. Karen or Vernon, do you have any questions? I know Amy did, but she has to,
Yeah,
so
Amy
let the
has to
record
step out.
reflect that Member Barnes had to step out.
Okay, so I just have a question for Laura. So our choices are either we accept the EIS, we reject the EIS, or we just let it lapse?
I would hope that's not an option.
Yeah, but I mean, that is what's in the front of us right now, or approve or reject.
Approve or reject, correct.
Okay, so two options, approve or
Yeah,
reject.
those are the only two options.
And KB, thank you for explaining that 15,000 professional football stadiums. I mean, I like your theory on how you explain things, like the fish, a garage full of fish. Now it's
Yeah.
15,000
That's 20
football fields.
20,000 Aloha stadiums.
20,000 Aloha Stadium, that's even worse. That's a lot of land. On conservation land, are you guys willing to not use that land, turn it over? Because if we go for a rule amendment, that's gonna take time. I mean, that's gonna take years.
So one thing I would just ask is that if you have the opportunity to look at the EIS and go to figure 3.4, it shows all of the conservation units. They extend well onto the federally managed lands as well. It's not, one of the reasons why the Army went with alternative 2 is the preferred alternative is so that we could continue to manage the conservation units on the western side of the state-owned land. I mean, from everything that we've seen just in the last board meeting as well, I don't know that that is gonna be a feasible option.
Okay, because with all the conservation issues that are coming up, that we are very concerned about our native birds and their disappearance.
Yes, and I can't overstate that the work that the staff is doing on Pōhakuloa to manage 37,000 acres of habitat is pretty remarkable. I'm sure people maybe question that, but I would again ask that you look at the documents that we have online.
Well, I did read EIS. Pages and tables that we have to go through. Oh, our batteries are dead.
Okay. Can't believe it. It's sorry. Okay. Do you have any other questions, Karen?
No.
Okay. Vernon, do you have any questions?
All right. There are a lot of concerns raised today, and I'd like to give you the opportunity to respond to some of those and clarify some of those. So either we're going to have a higher level of confidence that the final EIS was properly addressed, or we won't. Okay. And being a resident of Waimea and being up to Pōhakuloa training area a number of times, I know the recent progress that has been made at the installation as far as biological, archaeological concerns. And how the staff is dedicated to doing the best job they can and how they have made so much progress.
Yeah.
Can't change the past, you can only move forward, right? So, number of questions. So, there were concerns raised about the reliability of statements made by the U.S. Army because of concerns at how long it took Koholave to be investigated, cleaned up. And do you have any comment on that?
Well, just for the board, I would like you to understand, and I think some of you saw this when you visited Pōhakuloa, is that prior to, or after every training on state-owned land, all of the, and there's no ordinance coming into state-owned land. They have to clean up all of the rubbish, all of their casings, everything. It is inspected, it is, they can't leave the range without having it completely clean. That does not apply to the high hazard impact area. It has not been cleaned up.
Okay. So that's the distinction.
That is the distinction.
And then, being a resident of Waimea, I know from time to time we are asked to approve rates of entry to clean up the Waikoloa maneuver area. And I know that occurred during World War II. And so just a concern in the community, like World War II, Camp Taro was in the 40s, 45. So, you know, that was a long time ago, 70, 80 years ago. And the UXO contractors that are coming in are still conducting those surveys. One of the things that we do on some of the state leases is we impose removal bonds or other assurance that there will be timely addressing of those kind of impacts.
Right. The terms of the lease require the Army to do that, period. It has got to be cleaned up. And so there's no, the Army cannot get around that for the state-owned land in particular. So that has to be completed, and it will be negotiated with the state, and that it has to be to a standard that essentially brings it back to the condition in which we received it.
Okay. And is there a timing component associated to how long?
It depends on the negotiation.
Okay. And that would, if we go forward, that would be addressed in the lease terms, or when would that be, clarity be given to the timing? Or is that at the
You
end?
could request us to provide that clarity to you
Okay.
as well. But yes, I wouldn't, I think that for the lands that are not going to be retained, it would be perhaps as soon as 28 to go ahead. The areas that the Army is releasing back to the state, the 3,300 acres.
Is that Department of Hawaiian Homeland?
There's 250 acres of the Hawaiian homelands. We've already met with them. And then there's about 3,000 acres that is north of DKI that will also come back. That's the Footspoken Mountain.
Okay, thank you. It was identified earlier on that the EIS did not address a kapakai analysis. And I'm not clear that that's a requirement of a federal EIS. But do you have a comment on when that might occur, or whether it's the intention of the Army to conduct such an analysis?
It's required for HEPA. The legal guidance that we had is that because of how it is written in the state rules, it's that really the Land Use Commission is supposed to conduct the kapakai analysis, or the agency. So the cultural impact assessment is supposed to inform the kapakai analysis.
You had explained the Army's position on the reinterment of the artifacts that were removed in 2022. Auntie Maxine had a different point of view about being consulted. Is she a lineal descendant, or is she not?
I am not part of the consultation on that project. I know that there's agreement. I do know that there was a notice of intended disposition. Notice of intended disposition, which is a joint claim with several NHOs and Ohanas and then no descendants.
Okay. And I'm familiar, you know, I worked for Parker Ranch for about 10 years, and when we found artifacts on our property and we consulted with lineal descendants, they did not want photos, they did not want any discussion. When we put signage up, they did not want anything that indicated or alerted others that there might be artifacts or human remains or burials. And so I know it's a very sensitive subject, I'm assuming that you were sort of constrained by some of these.
Absolutely. The claimants have essentially get to set the terms of how this is discussed. And items such as these that come from a location that is essentially somewhat adjacent to other sites with Ibikuna, that in an ideal world, they would have just been left in place. That's what, no human remains have been removed from sites at Pōhakuloa. They've all been preserved in place. Because of that risk, they were removed, and unfortunately, because of a lot of the discussions back and forth between the garrison and Ship D and staff changing and everything else on the state side, we've been left with some confusion. And but I am one of those people when it comes to NAGPRA, is the sooner you can accomplish something, the better it is for the claimants, the better it is for the ancestor.
Okay, thank you. At some point during the discussion today, it was mentioned that the last air quality survey was done in 2007. Is that accurate?
That was specific to the DU research that was being done at the time. So during the construction of the Battle Area Complex in 2007, they found an unusual item. They subsequently did research and they discovered that these were part of the Davy Crockett weapon system. And
that's
400
depleted uranium?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Go ahead.
Well, yes, if it's okay, just so I can be clear, I don't want to get this wrong. Between 2007 and 2009, there was research testing and surveys conducted for 4 ranges where it was determined that those rounds were used. Visual ground and aerial surveys for DU rounds and radiation levels. Dust samples all returned with naturally occurring concentration, and it was determined no DU on state land. And then they did a year-long airborne monitoring survey. That was the 210 samples of air samples. And then the Nuclear Regulatory Commission did a study in 2011.
Okay. When you provide that information to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, do they render an opinion? Do they say we agree or no comment, or is there some feedback from them?
Their 2011 assessment was that the samples were all within naturally occurring levels and did not pose a risk to human health and safety, both for users and the offsite population. And I would just ask, I know there's a lot of public opinion about this, I would just ask people to go to the sources. We have documents on the website, and you can go to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
So you've disclosed what you know, you leave it up
Yes.
to someone else to render an opinion whether that's adequate or not.
Well, we've rendered our opinion that people generally don't agree with.
Okay, got it. There were a lot of comments about potential impact to the freshwater aquifer. Do you have a comment on that?
I hesitate to. We had a University of Hawaii researcher, a hydrogeologist, did core samples both at Pōhakuloa and over at the Moku parcel.
Is that Dr. Don Thomas?
Yes.
Okay.
And water was, I think they went down like 700 feet and hit the perched aquifer, and then went down to 1,800 feet and hit the deeper aquifer. There's no indication of any issues.
Okay. And my familiarity with water withdrawals in the summit area between Mauna Kea and Mauna Loa is that the nearest potable water wells are at Waikiki Ranch, which are probably 5-6 miles away, and go down a bay. No, they do not go down the bay, so it's perched water. But I don't think that's the same aquifer as exists under Pōhakuloa. Do you know either way?
I can't comment on that. I do know they had to drill about 5,000 feet to get to water
Okay.
at Waikiki.
All right, thank you. When those different comments came up about the potential impacts of the freshwater aquifer, can you comment on how the U.S. Army addresses petroleum products handling and storage on the base.
Yes.
And
but
it's,
I
I've
might-
seen what you do. I just want you guys to put it on the record.
Colonel Alvarado, could you please answer that?
Could you just repeat the question?
Yeah, just want to clarify on the base how you handle petroleum products as well as how you store them.
Yeah, so we have a dedicated compliance section that handles that, so all of the units have their equivalent compliance officers too. So when we have petroleum products, fuel, oil, whatever, those are maintained within their compliance, and if there's any disposal of that, that gets consolidated in our hazardous waste area that's dedicated for
Could
compliance.
you come to the
Yeah,
table?
sure.
I know, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Our microphones don't go down.
Sorry.
No, sorry, go ahead.
Start over.
Yep.
Yep. So we have a dedicated compliance team, my environmental team that works with the units that manages all of our hazardous waste materials, so petroleum and any other oil-based materials. So a lot of all that, as it's being utilized, once it's basically needing to be disposed of, gets consolidated in our designated compliance waste yard. And that is basically after that contracted to be removed in accordance with the compliance.
And the contemporary method of petroleum product storage requires secondary containment. So do all of your facilities provide that?
Yes.
Okay. And are those secondary containment equipment, are those the ones that are seismic proof or are resistant to seismic? You know, like a con vault that has a concrete vault and then a secondary containment?
That I have to get clarification on, but all of our, I guess, secondary containment that are for vehicles are above surface, so they're
Okay.
obviously
Okay, got it.
not
Okay.
secured to the ground.
During the discussion, it was mentioned that there were 2 endangered species that may not have been included in your fauna analysis. One was the yellow-faced bee and the sphinx moth. Can you comment on that?
Yes, let me go back to my notes, I'm sorry. The yellow-faced bee was first identified in 2017. I'm sorry, it was first listed as an endangered species in 2016. This is typically a coastal species, and so they think that it was an accidental transport to the saddle region. And that was, I believe, in 2019. The black-spurred sphinx moth was first also cited in 2019. It was listed back in the early 2000s. Although we don't have specific invertebrate studies that are right now, that this is still part of the monitoring program that the biologists do every time they go out in the field. So it's not like we've had an academic come in to do an updated, but we've committed to that as a mitigation measure. Because the studies are inherently difficult because invertebrates are seasonal, so species can be challenging to document, and that studies must be completed at various times to ensure full coverage, and this is why we proposed it as a mitigation measure.
So for your avian species, if it's not identified in your report, then it was not located. I mean, is that a safe
Well,
assumption?
that's all documented in the EIS. All the occurrences of all of the species is documented in the EIS. It's also in further detail in the biennial report that is also provided as a courtesy to DLNR.
Okay, sounds good. Just 2 more questions. It was mentioned about lead contamination in the soil. Is that something that exists that you've identified?
So there was an environmental condition of property conducted in 2017 that is also on our website, so anybody can go and look at that, phase 1 and phase 2. And so they identified certain sites. These are the sites that are generally visited during the DLNR inspections as a result of the Ching case. The lead was noted, and it was consistent with what they generally see on firing ranges for ammunition contamination.
Okay, got it. And then, just my last comment, it's not really a question, but as a resident of Waimea, I know how the military supports fire suppression efforts. Very involved with some of the first responder activities during the Mana fire when it burned across the Waikiki and came down to Moku and got close to Waikoloa Village. So I just want to acknowledge all the military presence and resources that were provided to fight that fire. It made a difference, as the man mentioned about Waikoloa Village, but also in Waimea town.
And one thing that's great is that there's been another initiative, a REPI project, to do another emergency response facility, a firefighting facility that is also on Big Island.
And didn't the military Department of Defense provide resources for an evacuation response facility within Waimanui at Pōhakuloa Department of Hawaiian Homeland's property?
That's what
DSIP
is,
project.
that's the DSIP project, yes.
Okay.
Sorry, I have that wrong. It's not, it was DSIP, not REPI.
Okay,
Not just the operations side.
all right, I'm good, thank you.
Excuse me, could I ask you guys to put the signs down? Thank you very much. Thank you. Amy, did you have questions?
Sorry, I know you wanted to go
I'm-
last, but I had to step
Yeah,
out.
Please go
And
ahead.
I know we're trying to make sure that we stay to time, so, and I appreciate colleagues have asked many of the questions that I was gonna ask. And appreciate, Alice, representatives from the Army, both for being here and for the tour that you provided of PTA last year. It was really helpful to be able to come out and see the site in person, so thank you for your hospitality. Thanks to staff for really excellent staff submittal and recommendations. I know it's a lot of work for us to review, it's a lot of work for you guys to review. Really good job, really appreciate it. And then just want to thank everybody from the community who came out in force and made their voices heard. I think I would maybe push back on my colleague, Member Char's comments a little bit. I do think that there were many substantive comments that were provided today, and I think that gets to the heart of one of the questions that I have based on my review of this document, which is a question about whether the criteria around responses to comments were met and decision on what does or does not constitute a substantive comment. So also I was wondering if you could just speak a little bit to how you decide what is versus isn't substantive and kind of your position on whether and how that criteria is met.
Yeah, I might have to grab my EIS, but it is essentially if it is outside of the scope. Thank you. General opposition, and that was largely what fell into the unsubstantive, was just general opposition comments, and the rest were addressed as substantive comments. We felt that we answered those adequately. I understand that staff disagrees.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think, and I appreciated Member Yoon providing a very comprehensive summary of the list of substantive feedback that he identified that the community raised today. I think, I think sometimes, the volume of community comment and feedback on this EIS document is enormous, and so I think it's a Herculean task to go through it, and I know it's been an incredible amount of work for all of you. I do think that sometimes there is a need, particularly as we think about being responsive to ways of being, ways of communicating that in the cultural context that we live and operate in, we have to be thoughtful about the fact that what one person may interpret as a non-substantive comment, I think if you scratch a little bit between the surface, below the surface, does actually have substantive content within it. And so I think just from my viewpoint, I think that is one concern that I have based on review is whether this meets the criteria of having responded sufficiently to the substantive comments. So this is just one sort of question / comment. I had a very long list of questions and we're running out of time. I guess one other question that I wanted to get to and that I think a lot of public comment got to, and apologies, Member Smith, if you asked this while I was out of the room briefly, but I think there was a lot of comment around the no action alternative and a perception within the public across many public comments that was not rigorously considered or presented as a viable alternative option. And so I just was wondering if you could respond to that.
It's required to study the no action alternative, and it was fully analyzed as part of along with the 3 action alternatives. So I feel that we fully analyzed that as well.
Okay. And then I think that this has also been touched on, but can you also just touch on why the characterization as an administrative renewal?
Because we are not proposing any new construction or any new training, and this is a real estate transaction, we have considered, and we've talked with the AG office about this before, consider this an administrative action because all of the training is covered under prior NEPA. And so there are ongoing mitigation measures, best management practices, standard operating procedures to manage all of that. And so for that reason, yes, we consider it an administrative action.
Okay. And I think there's some debate on both of those questions that's been raised both today and in I think we're up to 1,300 written public comments that have been received. Some of these questions have already been asked. One question that I wanted to ask was around the consideration of fee simple acquisition that was included in the FEIS. I think from my perspective, that's not something that the board has ever expressed support for or contemplated, so I'm just curious why that was included in the FEIS.
In terms of acquisition methods, there's the lease or there's a fee acquisition. Because it's ceded lands, we would need a 2/3 majority of the state legislature to be able to go ahead with the fee simple purchase. This is why we floated the concept of a land exchange. Please note that the FEIS is only examining how much land that the Army would prefer to retain. That will be documented in a record of decision to be issued later this summer. We do not cite what land retention method we would like to move forward with because we wanted to go in with good faith negotiations with the state, which no negotiations have started, and we cannot start negotiations until after the record of decision is issued.
And then do you believe that the EIS adequately incorporates in response to views opposing military lease renewal?
I do. It's really hard to, I feel like we covered this mostly in the environmental justice section, to describe some of that as well, to acknowledge the ongoing historical trauma that many Hawaiians feel.
Okay. And then one last specific question. I believe it was DOFA mentioned that there were broken links and inaccessible documents provided to staff and included in the FEIS. Just was wondering if you could respond.
When we saw that in the submittal, we went in and double checked. I think there were three not working, but they were fixed. So anyone can go on and access those.
In the interest of time, I have a lot more questions, but I'm just, yep, hold on.
Thank you.
I just wanted to get on the record that Uncle Kapu is watching, and he said that he was not consulted. Just wanted to put that on the record.
We met with him. We had a meeting with him in Laimana. So.
Okay.
Okay, she generated back.
All right. Well, Well, I'm not taking any more public comments. We close public comments. I mean, there's always, it's someplace in between. And so, what I do want to do, all of the board
Can I
members.
make a motion to go into executive session?
Okay,
Is that okay?
yep, you can make a motion to go into executive
Pursuant to
session.
section 92-5A4 HRS, in order to consult with our attorney on questions and issues pertaining to the board's powers, duties, privileges, and immunities. and liabilities.
Okay, the motion's been moved and seconded to go into executive session. All in favor, please say aye. So we'll go into executive, you can all stay here, but we're gonna go into executive session. We're in recess right now, or we're in executive session?
You know what, that was gonna be closed, but they closed it. So that's your problem. No, it's fine.
Sure.
We're on the third set of months.
I'm tracking you here.
Yeah, you trapped me as a chair.
Okay, Rihanna, whenever you're ready. Okay. All right. I'm sorry. We good, Rihanna? I think you may have to let board member Yunin. Okay. Okay, we're back in session. We went into executive session to confer with our Deputy Attorney General on the board's duties, privileges, and liabilities specifically related to this agenda item. And, no deliberations. Okay, so with that being said, we are back in session. We have closed public comments. We've asked staff and the Army representative some questions, and I think any other questions or comments, board members, either for the Army or for staff? Seeing none? Are you prepared to make a motion?
As the Hawaii Island board member, and understanding that there were concerns raised and discussed extensively today, I have a comfort level that the responses made by the U.S. Army have, in my opinion, addressed some of the shortcomings that were identified in the final EIS. And my motion is to accept the final EIS as being applicable to the requirements of the document.
Do I have a second on that motion for deliberation, for discussion?
I'll second the motion.
Okay. We're in discussion. Board members. Okay.
I disagree with that. The word warrior was used, and this installation is about training warriors, and this is my particular cultural practice background. A koa, a warrior, has a kuleana and a kanawai to preserve and protect mana. I say mana because mana is both animate and inanimate, acquired and inherited. Animate meaning living things, which is what the military, US military does. Inanimate are things like, they think that the things that are superfluous, like rocks, and yiri kupuna, and moipu. Those things us koa protect. Acquired means possessed over time, like through war. And yes, the US military and other militaries throughout time have acquired things through force over time. But koa, Hawaiian koa, preserve and protect inherited mana as well. Those possessed by birth through genealogy. And then our second kuleana is to maintain mana, which means we ho'omau, we persevere in the practice of being ma'a or trained, or we hope out, we let it be. And what we heard from our community is that we are exhausted. And as a koa, for the lahui, I hear that call. And therefore, we must hope out. And I bring this up because the fundamental question for me as a koa, is live fire and war practice good or bad for our cultural and natural resources? Yes or no? The answer is clearly no. There is no warrior or koa that would say firing guns and missiles and rockets into a natural and cultural resource environment is good for that cultural and natural resource environment. I don't care what study, we want to do. It's never going to be good. All we can do is mitigate and minimize the impact, but the answer will always be no. There is no way live fire helps our culture and natural resources. Awale. No way.
Okay, thank you, Kaiwi.
So, wait, I'm not done yet. And the thing that I take great umbrage with, because I don't know who said, but the Army is going to get whatever they want in the end. You see, that's again to my point of piling on to this exhausted community, right? I would be more okay if in earnest the Army came and identified this exhaustion and said things to ameliorate that exhaustion, but that hasn't been rendered. So, and one last thing, Chair, thank you. Palestine came up today. Now, I don't know about anyone's politics and whatever, but that goes to it speaks again to our desperation as a people, as humankind. The only difference between Hawaii, the Lahui, and Palestine is that it is indisputable that the Kanaka Maoli are the native indigenous people of Hawaii. It is indisputable that per capita we have faced devastating loss to our native peoples. So I mahalo those that want to acknowledge Palestine, and I don't care about the politics and anything. I'm not ma'a, but again, it goes to my point of us desperation as humankind. And I wish the board would pray and see and feel that desperation for our lovely. Mahalo, Chair.
Other board members?
Chair, I think, I think staff was very clear with the question before us when we came in today, which was that we needed to evaluate the EIS against 3 criteria, essentially procedure, content, and responses to comment. From my perspective, I think procedurally it's a pass. I think that there are concerns that staff has raised that are presented in the staff submittal, as well as concerns that I have and concerns that have been raised during the course of public comments today that lead me to conclude that both the content and responses to comment criteria have not been met. And so I think my preference would be a motion that would request that those deficiencies be addressed.
Thank you very much.
Chair.
Yes.
So, the community has spoken, and we've listened, and I've heard, and that means a lot. I just think that all the respect I have is based on having heard from the community. So I'm going to leave it right there until we call for the vote.
Thank
I'll
you.
let you know.
I want to thank the community for coming out. We hear you guys loud and clear. So now it's gonna be our decision at this point. Somebody's not gonna be happy, but we hope that we can all leave here as friends.
Bernie, do you want to make a
I seconded the motion only because I would hope that it would continue discussions, that the Army would be able to ameliorate some of the concerns that have been made. I, for one, still have a concern about the cleanup and munitions. I've voiced that in other proceedings regarding the Army, that it's not acceptable to me to wait 4 more years before you clean up some of the areas that should be cleaned up. On the other hand, I was very impressed with the sincerity of the good faith of the Army as it conducted himself on the tour that I was when I was up there, and that there was a cleanup. There was not a lot of litter, there was not a lot of munitions that were lying around. And that they had voiced a concern, the need, that this is the only place in the state for them to be able to activate the military from Schofield to the Big Island on a logistical and other relationship. And that they, by live token, were not doing live fire in any other jurisdictions or any other areas in this state, so that this was essential to them. And I heard that as well. So I see the need, I'm against war, but I see the need for us to have an army and for an army to be able to adequately train. But I still have some concerns about some of the areas that have been brought up today, which I hope can be mitigated.
So, let me just share some of my comments. I will share, I've been on the board for a little over 2 years. This is probably the hardest decision that I know that I've had to make. You know, it's always hard at DLNR trying to find balance. Our mission is to preserve and protect cultural and natural resources, but also recognizing that we have other competing interests, including national defense. But I will couch this, I am inclined not to support the motion that's before us. And I am not making a judgment about whether this training isn't necessary, because I do see the merits, and I see, I have seen, I too have visited Pōhakuloa. I've seen that they probably have one of the largest seed banks that DLNR uses. I've seen the partnerships that we've had with the Army on the stewardship of some of these lands. But whether this is, in my mind, the question before us is not whether the Army should continue training or not. It's whether this EIS has been presented to us meets the statutory requirements. That's really the question before us. And I continue to have, I think I share some sentiment as Board Member Barnes. I think procedurally, they have completed that and they've satisfied that requirement. The content requirements, I do have some questions, because in my mind, they have to provide us baseline information upon which we can make a decision, an informed decision. In particular, have all of the resources been identified? In my mind, based upon comments that we've received from State Historic Preservation Division, we have not had a full identification of all of the resources within the project area, nor outside the project area. I think there is some, in light of the recent placement of Mauna Kea as a traditional cultural property on the National Register. I think there is some merit of looking at this from a landscape perspective, and I don't think that was given adequate consideration. I do have some issues related to the biological studies. I think the fact that they're doing one now that's going to be completed in 2025 leads me to believe that we don't have sufficient information upon which to evaluate all the biological impacts. And relying upon a 2003, 2008, and 2013 biological opinions, in my view, are outdated. I think laws have changed, resources may have changed. So I find that to be, in my mind, from a content standpoint, not have been adequate. I also find the issue related to the conservation district, I think that is an extremely challenging issue. It's zone conservation. You have to comply with the conservation rules. Our OCCL has opined that military training is inconsistent. Now, perhaps other lands may be appropriate, but the lands that's before us, this current land is conservation. And I do believe that the cultural impact assessment, there should have been much greater consultation with members of the Native Hawaiian community, lineal and cultural descendants. There's a dispute between whether Ahupua was consulted or not, but I think consultation even beyond that. So in my view, I felt that the EIS did not adequately provide all of the, meet the requirements of having fully provided us baseline information, as well as I did feel the third prong being whether they satisfied all of the comments. I think there has been good faith, but I think that is the board to decide whether we believe that those comments have been adequately addressed. And again, in my view, I think some of the comments were not adequately addressed. I think others were. I do want to acknowledge, I think the Army is trying their best. This is a critical site, but again, that is not the question before me. I think hopefully there will be other opportunities for us to look at. Is there an alternative path forward for the Army, considering that they need to, this is one of the most critical places for them to train. But again, for me, the question is whether the EIS meets the requirement to determine that it's adequate. And I am, based upon my review of the document, the comments that we've received, including from our staff, the oral comments that we've received today, I do not feel that it is adequate. So I am not inclined to support the current motion. Okay. So with that being said, I think we're going to have to either we have to vote on this motion, or the move on withdraws the motion, because we have to take an action. So either we have to accept it or not accept it. So either we can vote on this motion, which was to approve the to accept the final EIS, and then let's see where we go from there. So I'm gonna do a roll call vote, Brianna. The vote is on. The motion has been moved and seconded to accept the EIS as submitted by the Army. Okay, can you do a roll call vote?
Member Ono?
No.
Member Barnes?
No.
Member Char?
Yes.
Chair Chang?
No.
Member Smith?
Yes.
Member Kanto?
No.
Member Yui?
All of it.
So the vote doesn't pass. It's only 2-5. So we need another motion.
Mayor, I'll make a motion to reject staff recommendation of the FEIS.
Okay, but it wasn't
However-
staff recommendation.
Yeah.
Staff didn't
Oh,
make a
sorry, yeah, you're right,
recommendation.
You're right, Chair. Let me amend. I make a motion to reject the current FEIS and respectfully ask that the Army follow up to address specific issues that I will enumerate as a part of this motion as a supplement to the draft for future board review. Issues including but not limited to Kapalaka analysis and its relevance to the document. 2, codified consultation log as evidenced by Ahamoku, Etimax, and Kawai Kapu Hewitt. Yes, they had a meeting, but were not consulted, so those things need to be specifically addressed that consultation indeed had taken place. 3, a complete biological opinion, as you alluded to, Chair. 4, an accurate weapon UXO uranium inventory, acceptable to the board and staff. 5, a complete greenhouse gas emission data inventory. 6, a cumulative analysis of such impacts. 7, a detailed inventory of the disposition and future disposition of iwi kupuna and Moku. 8, clarify that section 106 indeed is not required or required by law. And 9, a justification as to why the area of influence was narrowed or restricted, and if not, fine, then that area should be studied appropriately. I'm sure the board members have other list items, but those are mine for now, Chair.
So is your motion to reject the EIS and to, as a condition, to require them to come back and revise the EIS?
According, I mean, up to the AG, I'm not sure what the legal language is, but in my mind, it would be a supplement to the draft, identifying specifically these issues, maybe in an executive summary, but also substantiated with data to support that executive summary, so that the board has assurance that these items were adequately addressed per law.
Member Yin, would you accept a second with a modification to also include more fulsome and serious consideration of alternative 4?
I would, Member Bond, but I'm gonna wait for AG's
Sure,
whispering
sure,
here
yeah.
until,
So sorry, I'm consulting with my AG here, but I think, Member Yoon, I don't think we can require the Army to revise, how, they can choose what path they choose to do. I think that
Right.
this is a legal option. They can come in for a non-acceptance, they can revise the proposed, they can revise the EIS, but they could sue us. That's an option. They could do other things, but I don't know if we can order them as a condition to the non-acceptance that they have to do this.
sorry, Chair, I'm not ordering, I'm recommending, given community feedback. I am encouraging and hoping that as warriors, wanting to protect and preserve culture and natural resources, that they'll be amenable to my recommendation. I'm not requiring it, Chair.
Okay,
So sorry if I misspoke.
okay.
Chair, so I was seconding while you were consulting with the AG and had added. And I think, Katie, so my understanding of your motion is the non-acceptance of the FEIS, and perhaps what we can do would be to, the list that you went through, and I had suggested adding more fulsome and serious consideration of alternative 4, that we could just use that list as a description of basically the ways that we find the FEIS to be deficient, and that if the Army chooses to return, that we're providing this list as guidance of the areas that we would want to see addressed upon return, whenever that happens.
Yeah,
Is that fair?
that's correct, Member Barnes.
Okay.
That's correct, Member Barnes. And again, I'm not an attorney, but I'm also mindful of Mr. Franco's testimony today that I think the board has to be diligent and careful about the way in which we word these things so that we are clear kind of what the deficiencies are as we heard them, as we researched. But again, to clarify, Chair, this is not prescriptive, this is not a mandatory list, this is guidance to the Army so that they can come back in good faith and really be a partner in preserving and protecting culture and natural resources in Pōhakuloa.
I think that makes sense. If you've identified, if you are part of your motion and your comment is to identify areas that you found them to be deficient, I think that's reasonable, because we should have a record reflecting, as the move on, what you found to be inadequate about the EIS. But I
Thank
think
you,
whatever
Chair.
path they choose to take, we will leave it up to them. But I think that's appropriate to identify the specific deficiencies in the EIS.
Sorry, Chair, can I ask one more question? Kavi, did you mention addressing the conservation district use in your list? I didn't hear it.
I did not, Member Barnes, and I think Chair and you brought it up. So again, I was open to having the motion amended to include whatever the board felt was deficient.
Okay, so I'll modify my second again, so to include consideration of the conservation district use. on the list. Do you accept?
I said.
Okay.
Now, thank you for that clarification. Like you said, for me, this is probably one of the hardest decisions because I see the merits in, as I think Board Member Char had indicated, while we're not advocating for war, what we hope is that we have a place to train so that they never have to go to war. But I do see value in what PTA offers beyond just the Army's use, but it has been other state agencies that also use that site. So I share similar sentiments to Board Member Riley Smith. So this is just a hard decision for me, but thank you very much. Any other comments before we vote?
I would just second that, Chair, and again, thank Alice and the representatives from the Army who are here today. I think, you know, appreciate that there is a lot of work that's been put into this. I appreciate all that members of the Army who are here have done to protect our safety. And I guess I would just say that my hope is that what comes out of this is the strongest and most possible and most defensible EIS, so that you guys are in a strong position going forward. So that's the spirit with which I would offer this feedback.
I appreciate that. I think that you're I think it is, I appreciate the optimism. I too, whether it's an EIS or whether it's some other mechanism, but I think that this should not be the end of the discussion. Hopefully this continues, as I think Member Char, you know, he's alluded to and commented about the value of the military training. So I am hoping that this is not the end of the conversation, but it opens doors for other discussions. But I do appreciate the Army coming and the responses and the work that's been done. I do want to especially thank my staff. Too often, the state agencies and DLNR, we get criticized for not being, or not fully, you know, developing a record. And I think this staff, they work very hard in trying to put together facts so that ultimately the board can make the decision. So again, thank you, Lauren, Ian, and the team. This was a collective effort by all of the DLNR divisions that contributed, so thank you very much. So with that being said, we're going to call for the vote. Rihanna, could you do a roll call vote? And the motion is to accept, to not accept the Army's EIS, and it noted the various deficiencies in the document. Okay. Please.
Member Ono?
Yes.
Member Barnes?
Aye.
Member Char?
Abstain.
Member Chang?
Aye.
Member Smith?
No.
Member Kanto? Aye. Member Yoon?
Aye.
The motion passes with 5 votes. No, 5. Vernon abstained, and Riley voted yes. Voted no.
Okay,
Riley
you're
voted.
right.
So the motion passes with 5 votes. While I appreciate this, please, you know, I mean, I think this is hard. So I think as many people recognize the trauma and the historic pain that many of you have gone through, but I think we have a harder road ahead of ourselves, that we have to find opportunities to find balance. So I will appeal to all of you on that. So with that being said, having no other business before the board, we are adjourned.
I see you coming out here. I thought this was me forever. You're building the big guns, you know what I mean? Woo!
Yeah, tell them.
Thanks for being here.
Oh yeah. Just to start. Yeah. Well, no, I have my.
Now you want to go with the gasoline back in the day.
We'll work together. Shade it,
Thank you, Noah. Thank you.
I just told the chair and one former